Each year, hundreds of thousands of missing persons cases are reported. Most of the cases are solved whether or not the actual person is alive. But there are a few that manage to seemingly disappear off the face of the earth. Their cases are left to gather dust with no progression towards it whatsoever while their families grieve. It's hard enough to imagine what it would feel like to lose your loved one and not even know their fate, but try and imagine being that loved one. What happens to you? Where do you go? Is there any way home? You wake up in the morning and barely crawl out of bed. It's a Saturday, so it's around midday when you wake up. You go downstairs to your kitchen to fix breakfast. Do you cook yourself something? Or do you just want to pour a bowl of cereal? After you're done with your breakfast, you notice that your parents and siblings either aren't awake or aren't home. You check their rooms to discover their beds empty and unmade. Their TVs are still on, however, the only thing that they show are static. Okay, your TV providing service is a piece of shit anyways, so you pass it off. And your family might have gone to your brother's baseball game or your sister's cheer competition, so you pass it off as well. You decide to listen to your music because the silence has become eerie. Not even the faint buzzing in your ears nor the creaking of your house's walls can be heard. Silence. The ice maker isn't making any ice and the oven's clock is stuck at 12 o'clock. The clocks on the wall are frozen at 12 o'clock as well. You walk around the house as you are deep in your music. You peer outside your window and notice the sky is bright blue and cloudless. But the sun is dim. Dim? This is very off-putting for you, as looking into the sun is no more strenuous to your eyes than a household lamp. You turn off the music to make sense of the situation. Maybe an eclipse? No. Maybe a cloud is blocking the sun? Maybe, but there are no other clouds in the sky, and by now the cloud should have moved to reveal the sun once again. As your ears begin to settle from the music blasted from your headphones, you notice that there is still absolutely no sound at all. Only your breathing and your heart pounding. The intensity of the silence causes pressure to build up in your ears, almost as if they were clogged shut. Now you panic. You call your parents on your cell phone, but after you press call there is no response, not even a ring. You try your siblings, your grandparents, your best friends, and even your ex. But nothing. You run outside and discover that the air is devoid of any moisture and is very nippy. You make your way to your neighbor's house and pound on the door. No response. Once again. You can feel your stomach shift as you try and make sense of the situation. What could possibly be happening? You try your other neighbor's house with the same outcome. But now dusk is approaching. Could you be completely alone? You take your car to check around town to find empty streets and highways, no clutter, no cars, no people, nothing. You turn on your car radio and search for a radio station. But it is all complete silence. The sun is now setting and you feel the need to be at home, just in cases. A sense of safety, maybe. But once you pull into your driveway you see your front door wide open, even though you distinctly remember closing it before leaving. You enter your home once again and see a note written in plain black font on your kitchen table that reads, "Welcome. Forever." You are now done trying to rationalize the situation. Everything is wrong. That was not there whenever you made your breakfast this morning, nor when you left, and nobody else has been home. You search thoroughly around the house for anyone else but find nothing out of place and no sign of that anyone else had been here or was here other than the open front door. You are completely alone. Maybe some sleep will help. After all, by now you are becoming quite drowsy. Maybe when you wake up it's just a bad dream. Maybe everyone was playing a prank, but as you lay your head down to rest an eerie silence remains. An eerie silence finally broken. In the distance, a womanly shriek echoes throughout the darkness and throughout the trees. Near your house, it's calling your name. You cannot close your eyes now as the screams slowly inch closer to your house. You dare not look out the window and tightly close your eyes, hoping to never see what is calling your name. The screams become louder and louder as the front door is opened from the outside. The shrieks pierce throughout the house, vibrating the windows and wounding your ears. You now miss the eerie silence. The screams are becoming more and more audible as the wooden stairs creak at the weight of a foot. Still calling your name, As the shrieks approach your bedroom door, they stop. The knob on the door is slowly turned and the door is opened. You are now greeted with the eerie silence of waiting, and the raspy breathing that is not your own. I've been considering this meeting for a long time. For weeks I debated even allowing it to take place. After that, I pondered the direction I would allow it to take. You see, it has been decades since I've allowed myself to make a decision without meticulous calculation. Emotions outside of the realm of serving myself have always been a foreign notion to me, but I learned how to emulate them early on, which obviously contributed to my successes. Before I carry on, I should mention that the conclusions I reached in regards to this interview included the resigning of my personifying facade. After all, my friend, I have been incarcerated and I am hours from leaving this plane. I think I've earned the chance to learn what vulnerability feels like, but I digress. I'll spare you most of the early life biography. It really isn't that captivating. It unfolds as you would expect any young psychopaths. I found myself able to quickly analyze information at a tender age, but struggled with things as simple as a facial expression. I had almost unstoppable urges to kill animals and start fires, sometimes simultaneously. I wet the bed past the age that it was acceptable. Yes, the trifecta that would make any psychiatrist balk. My parents, astoundingly, did a sufficient job at keeping my atrocities a secret. My country bumpkin instructors wrote my cold behavior off as a phase that I would eventually grow out of. Really, I was fortunate in that my childhood was less trying compared to others with my condition. Anyhow, not being forced to contend with quack pediatric psychologists allowed my teenage curiosities to take hold. It was obvious that I wasn't like everyone else. I started there, researching my own intellectuality, and consequently further developing my niche for analytics, cause and effect. I found this convenient, as my advanced ability to foresee consequences kept my hormonally driven desires from converting me into a meandering Neanderthal. My cold demeanor put off most female prospects, so I often considered simply taking what I wanted, but as I mentioned, consequences forbade my desire for conquest. I'll pause a moment while you cope with the fact that I am not a repressed homosexual. Moving on, there came a day in the late 1970s, just before I entered college, that I found the maiming of animals no longer satisfied. Fittingly, I began to consider the prospect of performing my atrocities on humans. You may find it odd that I never shrank from the concept. I simply realized that to do so would require extensive preparation if I was to remain a free man. The university allowed me time to construct my feigned humanity. While I double majored in psychology and chemistry, I attended theater, constantly comparing the thespians' performances to the reviews in the papers, deciphering which expressions were convincing and so on. I took human anatomy as an elective, devouring information so efficiently that I impressed many of my professors. I will conclude this portion with the revelation that my first murder came in my third year of undergraduate. I simply could not bottle my thirst for blood any longer. Needless to say, it was sloppy and rudimentary, but I improved rapidly via repetition and revision. Eventually, and after a few close calls, I began to savor the juncture at which my victim's expiration became imminent, their pleading and desperation giving me further insight into the spectrum of despair, hopelessness, and regret. Most of what I did between the years of 1978 and 1982 is now a matter of public record. I avoided the senseless, unraveling spiral that you see out-of-control criminals initiate in film. I got out of the scientific field and into the real estate business, as sitting in a lab all day wasn't conducive to meeting potential victims. I found some entertainment value in predicting the markets. Little did I know how wonderful this decision would be. I quickly became bored with simply murdering one person at a time. I wanted to broaden my horizons, so to speak, but I was a little short in regards to abstract creativity. But then came the Tylenol incident, and it was a revelation. Anyone familiar with pharmaceuticals knows that tamper-resistant packaging was a direct result of a still anonymous individual who placed cyanide randomly in Tylenol packets in 1982. 7 people met their demise. But you know that already. My first reaction was one of jealousy, knowing that I could never be so original. So, I decided I would do it better. By the time I had finalized my plan, cameras in pharmacies were already on the rise. The aforementioned packaging was becoming more and more prominent, but I was not discouraged. I had already prepared for the need to frame some poor schmuck. That person turned out to be Stella Nickel. I learned from the public data on her previous convictions that she was a prime candidate for a framing. Through observation, I learned that her relationship with her husband was so rocky that if I should make him a victim, she would certainly be a suspect. All it took was a trace of algicide from her aquarium and some strategic planting of what I must say was some exquisitely produced cyanide in a few Excedrin bottles. In the end, I didn't get to my casualty goal of 5, but 2 was still better than what I had achieved to that point. I moved to a different area of the country and let my work come to fruition for the next few years in court. Nicole went to prison for 90 years for something she hadn't done but wished she had. Had I been capable of guilt, I predict I would have felt minimal amounts. I began planning my next masterpiece in 1984, stemming my desires with a simpler one-at-a-time method at which I had become so proficient. An early fascination of mine was the Zodiac Killer. Everyone knows the story, so I'll spare you the recount. I had spent what little leisure time I had in late college studying his letters, and although they confounded me, I viewed this less as a failure and more so as an homage. He or she was famous, but anonymous credits without the consequences my highest aspiration. Heriberto Seda was the next subject of my discreet visitation. He was an interesting fellow, yet troubled, and once again he had various qualities that made him an easy scapegoat. He shared my fascination with the Zodiac Killer, and also like me, had aspired to mimic him. Yet, he was embarrassingly sloppy, and therefore the circumstances were easy to manipulate. I watched from afar as he failed to murder 2 victims, and then I proceeded to kill 3 in his name as he continued to allow other victims to live. I would venture to say that his setup was an easier task than Nichols. I wrote 2 anonymous letters with a similar style to the original Zodiacs, which to my dismay were initially dismissed as a hoax. But eventually Seda was caught in 1996, and his desire for notoriety was so that he even confessed to the 3 murders I had committed. I was elated. Let's take a break, shall we? Surely you are curious as to what happened to my victims interspersed between my more infamous bloodletting. Well, I eventually lost count, but at one point in the late 90s I was averaging 2 a month. You see, real estate had become such a profitable venture for me that it consumed too much of my time for me to effectively design anything more grandiose than a bathtub dissection or heparin-induced exsanguination. I have professed already that I lack the necessary cortex for any variety of respectable creativity. What little expression I did attempt came in the form of disposal. I put various new twists on dismemberment, scattering parts by mail from multiple postal locations. You remember the panic, and disintegrating them with various concoctions. I buried people with lye, and incinerated them slowly while alive. I once allowed myself to lose control and removed someone's head by repeatedly smashing them with a car door. The same vehicle they found in the pond in Boone, North Carolina. Yes, I'm clearly a monster. But to maintain any semblance of what I consider happiness I had to constantly become more extravagant. Much like one's taste in pornography, I had to constantly become more grotesque to achieve the desired effect. Meanwhile, I became a multimillionaire. I didn't truly care. Murder doesn't cost much at its base, but my access to the superfluous allowed me to constantly experiment with more elaborate methods. There's not many things on earth that are more enjoyable than disposing of someone on your yacht and then enjoying a $10,000 bottle of red in the middle of the Atlantic. Again, I will digress. In the early 2000s, I found myself idolizing Jack the Ripper. I found myself fancying our similarities: anonymous, multiple victims, knowledgeable in anatomy. I turned control of the day-to-day realty over to an associate who had been kissing my ass for a decade in order to permit myself time to plan. By 2008, I was ready. Derek Brown was yet another idolizer, much like the aforementioned Seda. Regrettably, he had previous convictions regarding rape and had been a suspect in another murder. What's more, he lived in the Whitechapel area, where prostitution was still prominent. I chose 2 women, and kept them sedated in one of my estate's basements for several days while I ascertained access to Brown's apartment. I waited for him to depart alone, preventing an alibi, and brought both women into his bathroom. I injected them both with a compound similar to midazolam as I returned to the car I had stolen for my tools. I had, over time, purchased a set of what would have been surgical tools in the 19th century for once I decided to be authentic. I proceeded to dismember both women, being as incautious as possible with their fluids, and then spent some time in the apartment as if I lived there. Then I left without my tools or tidying up. It didn't take long for the local authorities to interview Brown and search his apartment. In his panic upon discovering that his flat had been used for something grisly, he elected to cut out the carpet and have the walls repainted. Obviously, this was a mistake. As Brown became a convicted murderer, I came upon a seminal moment. I never thought it could happen, but serial killing was, well, monotonous. I actually tried giving it up for a few months. During my self-prescribed abstinence, I came upon a second realization. Given the fact I hadn't even been suspected of wrongdoing for a quarter century, I deemed it safe to adopt the belief that in most instances, the illusion of security was present as a deterrent, but little beyond. I decided in 2012 that domestic terrorism would likely satiate my desire for something more. The concept seemed simple enough: slip something into a large gathering of some variety. A sporting event would suffice, as there were always hired guards, but usually nothing to intimidate the more dedicated. Even if I were exposed, I could brutalize my way in and be gone just as the explosion destroyed any evidence of my being there. I could easily alter my appearance for any cameras, and my extensive resume in the chemical field only added confidence. My downfall, in the end, was my lack of respect for the upper levels of federal law enforcement. The locals were of no consequence, but the digital age has infiltrated all aspects of discretion. Despite my utilization of several reliable back channels, 2 of my acquisitions were flagged by the CIA. 3 days before my plan came to fruition, a team of operatives entered one of my residences in Aspen and apprehended me. Thus my reign as the world's most sophisticated savage came to an end. Surely you can appreciate my run. Not a soul knew that I was an active serial killer for over 30 years. The trial only revealed half of what I had done, and it was more than enough to imprison me here. Yet, my desire to kill persisted, and I have no intention of opposing it. Speaking of resistance, did you notice that the guards have been gone for some time? Of course not. You are under the impression that I adore the sound of my own voice, and I am well aware of how numbingly captivating my story is, especially to a sensationalizing muckrake like you. Is it a surprise that my financial success brings me considerable sway with the common man? As I mentioned, I have no intention of giving up my cause. After all, I've never killed anyone on national television before. I was adopted. I never knew my real mother. Rather, I knew her at one time, but I left her side when I was too little to be able to remember. I loved my adopted family though, they were so kind to me. I ate well, I lived in a warm and comfortable house, and I got to stay up pretty late. Let me tell you about my family real fast. First, there's my mother. I never called her mom or anything like that, I just called her by her first name. Janice. She didn't mind at all though. I called her that for so long, I don't think she even noticed. Anyhow, she was a very kind woman. I think that she is the one who recommended my adoption in the first place. Sometimes I would lay my head against her in front of the television and she would tickle my back with her nails. She is one of those Hollywood mothers. Second, there's Dad. His real name was Richard, but he never really liked me much, so I began to refer to him as Dad in a desperate attempt to gain his affection. It didn't work. I think that no matter what I called him, he would never love me as much as his own child. That's understandable, so I really didn't press the matter. The most notable attribute of Dad was his unmoving sternness. He was not afraid to pop his children when they did something wrong. I found that out before I could use the restroom properly. He didn't hesitate to spank me. Well, I'm in line and it's because of his methods. Lastly, is my sister. Little Emily was really young when I was adopted, so we were about the same age, but she was slightly older. I liked to think of her as my little sister, though. We got along better than any sibling could possibly get along. We would always stay up late together and just talk. Well, she did a lot of the talking. I mostly just listened because I loved her. It was a great setup that we had. We were short on bedrooms, so because I didn't want to sleep in the living room by myself when I was littler, I had a pallet set up for me next to her bed on the floor. This is where I have slept since, but it was cool with me because I enjoyed being with her and I had always felt pretty protective of my little sis. Everything changed on a horrible Wednesday night. I was at home taking a nap when little Emily opened the front door. The sound of the door opening pulled me to a state of consciousness and I walked from the room down the hall to the living room. That's when I first remembered it was Wednesday. I was never any good at keeping track of what day it was. Actually, I'll just go ahead and say it, my sense of time was horrible. But nevertheless, I knew it was Wednesday because Emily had just come home from her church's youth group gathering. She walked in the front door and hugged me, and then was followed in by Dad and Janice. "You have a good nap?" Janice said teasingly as she ruffled up my hair. I just shook my head away and snorted in a manner that clearly expressed that I was teasing back with her. "Don't you snort at your mother like that," said my father gruffly with authority. He shut the door behind him and hung up his coat. I was clearly joking. I growled under my breath. He must not have heard me because I didn't feel him smack me. Emily then proceeded to our room and I followed. She started telling me about her day. You know, usual teenage girl stuff, but I listened so that she would feel better. After her summary, she suggested watching TV and I obliged and jumped onto the couch as she was going for the remote. She rolled her eyes at my little brother like immaturity and scooted me over and sat down. The TV turned on and we watched it together until the sun went down. Emily was the kind of girl that instead of watching cartoons and soap operas would rather watch Discovery and Animal Planet and Natural Geographic. I like those too, so I didn't mind. Actually, those were the only channels that can hold my attention. So it got late and Janice walked up behind the sofa. "Emily, it's past your bedtime, turn off the television and go to your room." "You too." She pointed at me. Emily turned off the program we were watching grudgingly and stood up. She started down the hallway to our room. As I followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. We went into our room and Emily turned off the light. Just as she did, I caught a flash of movement out of the corner of my eye. It was out the window, but as soon as I redirected my line of sight to where the window was no longer in my peripheral vision, what it was that I thought I saw was gone. I still remained alert. For my sister's sake. I laid there in the darkness with nothing but the thin ray of light from the street lamp outside to illuminate the room. It wasn't much. Time and time again I could have sworn that I heard subtle sounds just out the window. A twig break, leaves crunching, clothes jostling, and all the while I could smell a faint stench of sweat and blood. I kept my eyes open most of the night. The sounds outside subsided and the smell left my nose. I began to feel at ease. My eyelids closed. Not long after that, I heard a very loud crash on the other side of the house. I was up in an instant. "There's someone in the house," I barked with extreme adrenaline coursing through me. "Wake up," I shrilly pleaded with Emily. She did, and as soon as I saw her sit up I ran to my parents' room. Dad was dead. His neck was splayed open and gaping as blood spilled out of it, off the bed, and onto the floor. I saw that the master bathroom's door was closed and just before it on the outside was a man. A man. I don't feel comfortable calling it that. He was very large and rugged. He turned around and saw me, and that's when I saw him accurately for the first time. I won't forget it. His eyes were large and beady and trapped with lust. He was styling a beard that was badly unkempt with blood dripping off. His clothes were dirty and his face was cold. Just then I noticed the same horrid smell of sweat and blood from earlier, but this time it was overwhelming. He saw me. He saw me and grinned with a set of crooked yellow teeth. That smile threw me off. I thought that I was going to die. But then he turned back to the bathroom door completely unperturbed by my presence. I was terrified and didn't know what to do. I just yelled and cried. I watched as he shouldered through a door that was Mom's only protection. I watched as he raised the large razor that he was carrying, but had obviously neglected to use properly. I watched as he sliced her open and tore her to shreds. I then heard something, the last thing that I wanted to hear. It was Emily's scream coming from behind me. The large monstrosity looked up from my butchered mother and stared at my little sister. I was distraught. He stood up and quickly started walking toward us. My sis turned and ran, and I was at a loss when he bypassed me and went straight after her. Why was she still in the house? Had she not assessed the situation and run? Apparently not. And now she was dead and I was alone. I ran after them both. I expected the man to kill her as he had the rest of my family, but I was sadly mistaken. He grabbed her by the arm and jerked her as a way to make clear that he was in control. He dragged her through the house. I was making all of the noise I could now, hoping and praying that someone would come to my aid. He mustn't take her. Not her. As he passed me I backed against the wall and whimpered with terror. Why? He didn't respond except by putting his free hand on my head while Emily screamed in the other and saying good boy. He gave another crooked grin and a very cold, unnatural laugh. I followed him to the door where he dragged my helpless sister after him. He opened it, pulled her out, and slammed it shut behind him. I am now sitting in the house with my mutilated adopted parents, shivering and whimpering with dismay. He's out there with her, doing who knows what to her, and I can't do anything. I would if I could, but I can't. I would chase after them in a heartbeat, but I can't. I sit here, looking at the front door. I look down at my paws. If only I could open doors. Credited to agents and post views, 19,940. Please wait. Alright. I just want to say, I'm not the kind of write it all out in a journal kind of guy. But, there really isn't much to do anymore. I guess I'm just bored. There isn't much to do anymore, especially in this rickety old house. If you were to see it, you'd probably think it was abandoned, which isn't totally incorrect, but I live there now, if now is even a concept that could be considered part of my reality. Well, now that I think of it, I guess it's the only thing I can count on. There is only now. No tomorrow, no yesterday, no when or then, nothing that could have mattered matters anymore. Okay, back on topic. I'm writing this really just out of boredom, as I've probably done everything else there is to do, which is surprisingly a lot. I guess this all started about a year ago, when my grandfather's antique pocket watch broke. It was really cool to have with me after he died, just being able to keep a piece of him with me, a really awesome looking piece at that. From what my mother had told me, it had been even more magnificent when it was still in his possession. Hanging out of his pocket, it had always complemented his bright, green eyes, small specks of gold in them making them look almost as rare and spectacular as the watch itself. He hadn't known me well, nor I him, and yet, I was somehow the one who ended up with the shiny timepiece. My mother on the other hand, she inherited his whole house, a massive building he only used when he wasn't out and about on his adventures. Selling antiques, digging up fossils, that was what he spent his whole time doing. Ignoring my mother, my sister and I while he was away, not answering our calls, and treating us to fancy dinners when he came to visit us months later. I don't know how I really felt about him. Sometimes I hated him, others I looked up to him wholeheartedly, as some mythical beast whose world I could never see or understand. All in all, I guess he didn't do anything really important for the world in his life besides die and give us his stuff. Only a month after he did, we moved to his giant building, planning to set up our new lives there. We did what all families do when they move, shoving all of the boxes full of our stuff in one room, slowly pulling what we needed out, letting it all settle into the place it seemed to fit best. It was spread out really thinly, very little furniture in each of the echoing rooms. It was different there, hollow and quiet, unlike our apartment back in Manhattan, Like all of the life and energy had been sucked out of the world. It was nice while it lasted. My sis ignored me like any younger sibling. My mom doted over her like she was a blessing to this world. I sat in my room playing chess by myself, the internet not having been installed yet. As boring as it sounds, it was bliss compared to my life now. Life with a purpose. Life where there was something different happening every day. A life where I didn't have to cry myself to sleep, hoping for something, anything to change. Every day is the same, there's no changing it. My watch broke, and ever since then, it was the same day, every day. They couldn't tell, my mom and sister. They just said the same things, walked the same paths as the day before. At this point, they're more closely related to weather than the people I loved. You may love the rain, but no matter how many times there's a downpour in your neighborhood, the rain doesn't remember you, or the thousands of times you've expressed your love for it in the past year. That's them. Essentially empty shells of the beings they once were. I guess I'm empty too. Not much of the person I used to be is left in here. Just a husk of a human, going through the cycles of my new world. As I've said, it wasn't always like this. I thought I had gotten one of the greatest gifts a guy could have. A chance to do things over, a chance to make things better for myself. It only felt like that for the first week or so. I woke up that day for the second time, hardly noticing the subtle things that should have clued me into what was going on. Walked down the fancy, oaken stairs, greeted my mother, waited for breakfast to arrive in front of me as I messed around with the few offline games I had on my phone, and my sister with hers. Mom set it down in front of me. Hash browns. Again. That was weird. We tended to have a fairly simple weekly diet, frozen pancakes and waffles or French toast on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, hash browns on Saturday and Sunday, and cereal on Tuesday and Thursday. Mom? Is this leftovers from yesterday? I'm pretty darn sure I ate the last of them yesterday. Of course not. I just made them today. No way there'd be any leftover with you in the house anyway. She laughed, handing a second plate to my sister. Now, I know what you're thinking, I'm just some loser who makes their mom take care of them each and every day, but that's not it. She loved what she does for us. She didn't need to work anymore, with the money that my granddad left her along with the building, so she spent her time watching over us. No clue how she could have lived that way, I sure couldn't. But she loved it. So, throughout the day, I noticed the things I'd missed earlier. The single vase I'd dusted had a thick layer of gray on the surface. The laundry that I'd washed was still in my room, in a messy pile on the floor, and as lame as it sounds to say, my level on a game I'd been playing the day before was lower than I'd left it. You know that movie, Groundhog Day? That's what I started thinking this was going to be like, having to make it the perfect day. The next day didn't do anything but support my theory. Hash browns again, cheap ramen for lunch, and a great turkey dinner to finish it off. I had to admit though, I was getting a little sick of them, the food I mean, not my family. The third day of resetting, as I had dubbed it, I decided to try changing things a bit. Instead of sitting in my room, I helped out in the kitchen, making sure to keep my mother company, and to sway her into cooking something besides turkey. Pasta was a welcome taste to my buds, the tomato sauce in amazing contrast to the gravy of the past 3 days, but, each morning, I just kept resetting. No matter what I did, telling my family I love you, or running myself ragged, making sure they'd have the best day of their lives, it just would go all of the way back to zero. No memory of what I had done, no lasting effect on them, no reciprocation to all of the love I'd given them. After a while, I gave up. There was nothing I could do for them to make their day any better than it had been the day before. I just sat in my room, lay on my bed, sleeping the same day away, hoping to have my mother calling me down for waffles awaken me. That day still hasn't come. On my second week, I decided I should try something new. When my mother left for the kitchen, I bolted into her room and then her private bathroom, where she kept all of the medications. Despite my being in high school, she still didn't trust me to take the right pills in case of a headache. I swiped a bottle of acetaminophen, shoving it under my shirt. As long as I acted casually, she wouldn't notice the bulge under my blue tank. I took them all. They were nasty to taste, but I managed to swallow about 100 grams of the stuff, guaranteeing my liver's failure. That day was the first time I died. It wasn't painful, just longer than I expected. As I passed out, I felt time slowing, then I woke up. I was in bed, wearing the same clothes as the day before. I just kept going with the plan, changing it every way I could. I did the classics: toaster in the bath, out a window, over the stairwell. They all were quick and almost painless. But the same day always came, the same sun shining through the window I jumped out of to the concrete below. There was something about it though. It brought the next day, today, even faster, so maybe there was something to the idea. There was only one thing I hadn't done. It'd be long and painful, but maybe it'd work. That day, I hung myself. It was more painful than anyone could have imagined, feeling my lungs gasp for oxygen, my fingers and toes numbing slowly. Then it was over. I was back in bed, the pain that had been spread throughout my body was gone, only the lingering memory of the aching feeling still there. No way in hell was I going to do that again. Way too much pain. I'd thought for weeks, months, doing whatever I could to make things different. I got violent. Luckily, for myself and my family, I'm not all that strong, so they were able to restrain me. I don't really want to talk about this much, but it needed saying. I doubt anyone will ever see this. It'll probably be gone tomorrow. But if there is a chance, I'll write this every single day, till I know this word for word, and keep on going. And if anyone sees this, make sure not to do anything I said I had done. I'm pretty sure it was the watch, but I don't know. It's not worth the risk. You could end up like me, clinging to the last bits of sanity that are left inside of my mind, and dreading the next time that you wake up, only to know that everything you ever do will matter to no one. Well, it's not like my life before this mattered much. Ha! Classic comedy right there. I heard it was good to leave letters off on a lighter note, so here's another joke. A baby's laughter is the most beautiful sound you will ever hear. Unless it's 3 a.m., and you're home alone, and you don't have a baby. The following set of instructions is meant to serve as a guide for any who have found that they have lost someone that is simply too important to them. Their visage haunts your dreams, the memories you have of them tearing into your soul with dreadful malice. There is a way to draw them back, however, from the fate that claimed their existence. Just follow these instructions, and you will find that you can cheat the Reaper. Now, there are a couple of prerequisites to performing this ritual that should be addressed beforehand. For starters, the person who you are reviving must not have been dead longer than a month. The body exists to house the spirit of every human being, and spending such a long time without a spirit makes the shell that it once inhabited useless. Furthermore, the person whom you plan to revive must have a body to return to, so cremated ashes or nothing at all simply won't cut it. Now there are ways around this, but I will save those for later. To get started, go to the place where your loved one is presently, most likely a graveyard or morgue. In neither case, you will need to have direct access to the body, which implies that you will need a shovel and a crowbar if they are already buried. When you have direct access to your loved one, you will need to place them somewhere where you can lay yourself next to them so that both of your bodies are in arm's reach of each other and that you are level. Once you do that, you will almost be ready to begin the resurrection. You should consider a few things before continuing. If you, in any way, doubt that you can bring this person back, then give up. If you have any resentments toward this person that you never forgave them for and never will, then give up. If you were curious enough about this ritual to simply choose a cadaver at random to experiment upon, give up, but not before investing some time deeply thinking about your current life choices. The spirits hate the living with burning envy, and will not hesitate to take advantage of your life and steal it from you. If you are willing to take that risk, or are the type to disregard potentially life-ending consequences, then read on. Lay yourself beside your loved one, placing their hand in yours and holding it firmly. Close your eyes and begin chanting in your head this phrase: death may take, but death shall not take from me, over and over in your head. Do so until you fall asleep. If you are having trouble with this part, a sleeping aid is recommended, and you may tie your loved one's hand to your own as long as there is some connection between yourself and them. When you have fallen asleep, you will gain consciousness while sitting down in an elegant chair, crafted from the dark wood and cushioned with satin covers. You will be inside of what appears to be a sea of unending darkness, creating a void around you that obscures any possibility of sight beyond that of your chair and a small circle around you. Whatever you do not leave the chair, not under any circumstances. Doing so removes the protective layer of darkness that surrounds you from everything that you can't see, and you really don't want that to happen. This chair is the seat from which you will call to the spirit that you will need to resurrect your loved one. You must immediately begin thinking of your fondest memories with the person in question, and continue to think about them without stopping. Your thoughts will act as a beacon to the spirit, and they will instinctively try to draw closer to you. You will see them wander through the void, a white light wisping through the inky darkness, hovering towards you. You should begin calling their name, or any title that you usually called them by, and beckon to them. If they remember you fondly, they will start drawing toward you and your chair. Once they are within a few feet, and you see that they are in the light surrounding you, reach out the hand that you didn't use to hold their body's hand, and let them come to rest in your palm. Hug them to your chest with that arm, and rejoice in knowing that you are almost done. Not many make it this far, and few can say that they have hugged someone that they lost. Now that you have the spirit, reach your other hand away from your body and close your eyes. Imagine yourself talking to this loved one after they return to the land of the living as you reach your hand out. After a few moments, you will lose consciousness, and the darkness behind your eyelids shall overtake you. If all goes well, then you will wake up where you fell asleep. Your loved one's hand will still be in yours, and you will notice that it's considerably warmer. If you look over at your loved one, they should be fast asleep. They will live life as though their death never affected them, though they will have clear memories of their death and some of the afterlife. All's well that ends well. You have cheated death with essentially no cost to yourself, which is quite the accomplishment. I did mention before, however, that there is a way to resurrect without the original body. You can try to resurrect someone by drawing them into an item or group of conjoined items as long as you have some small piece of the loved one to add to the item. In my case, my nephew decided to sprinkle my ashes onto a computer before performing a ritual while gripping the mouse. I had no idea that I was going to come back in such a way, or else I would never have returned. Now, I sit, day in and day out, constantly forced to watch over strings of data and code, hoping that someone will be clumsy enough to knock over this prison I find myself in. If you want to resurrect your loved one, consider this: do they want to come back? And what will they do to you when you force them back?